Welcome to this month's regional bonus MMA Logcast episode. We're going over Cage Warriors 171, which goes down Saturday morning / afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in on the North American side of things. But shout out to everybody that voted on the PFL comment section in regards to which regional show they would like breakdowns for, whether it was Cage Warriors or Octagon. It seemed like just by a slight margin, most people wanted to see the Cage Warriors breakdowns, so I was able to get down to that and finish that off for you guys. Now, PFL is mere moments away from kicking off, so I'm going to go quick picks version of the Cage Warriors picks for you guys here, and I'm sure most of you guys would really appreciate it. Alfred over there making some noise, but it's all good. But I wanted to get these picks out for you guys ASAP. 16 fights to break down, so there's a ton of researching to go into this, but I was still happy to come out on the other side and have some decent picks for you guys. Hopefully they end up cashing when it's all said and done. If you are looking for Octagon breakdowns though, those will be in written form on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. I'll be doing those throughout the evening, probably into the night. So if you want to check those out, check the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link for that in the description below. You'll also be able to find all the official plays that I'll have for this Cage Warriors card, including the Octagon card, Lock of the Night play, Dog of the Night play, and a bunch of other great plays as well, hopefully, that end up cashing out for us as well. All right, let's not waste any more time. Like I said, PFL is about to kick off, so I want to get through these 16 fights as quickly as possible. I'm going to get right to the point with every single matchup. Not a lot of dogs that I'm liking on this card. It seems to be more so of a setup card for a lot of the Scottish talent that's on this Cage Warriors 171 card. So let's get right to it. First fight of the night, Cornelius Aritonang, coming in at minus 150, going up against Scottish fighter Thomas Hepburn, coming in at plus 130. Now, Cornelius is actually a part of the MMA Fight Academy that the Cage Warriors has invested in, where they bring in talent from all over the world, invest in them, give them the best training possible, and then let them perform on the Cage Warrior scene and try to build their way to the UFC, Bellator, PFL, whatever it might be. And Cornelius is one of the brighter prospects coming out of there. He's an aggressive striker that loves to move forward and put pressure on his opponents. His defensive grappling is improving hella fast, and that's going to be very important for him here against Hepburn, who normally looks to take opponents to the ground. His stand-up, non-existent. The guy is a sitting duck in terms of the striking realm. He tries to go for pulling guard or going for sneaky trips to get fights to the mat. Has shown some decent durability at times, which leaves me wondering that even if he is a sitting duck on the feet, he might be able to get over that 1.5 round mark. But regardless, I think Aritonang really puts it on him and eventually gets him out of there via TKO in the second or third round. Next up, we got Khadim Dia coming in at minus 225. Khadim, I think he's Italian if I'm not mistaken. Minus 225 going up against Mush Aslani, coming in at plus 190. Both guys are grapplers. Aslani more so a wrestler, but doesn't have the greatest gas tank, and we've seen him start to slow down later in fights and eventually get finished. Khadim Dia is a BJJ brown belt who's 4-0 as a professional, and I expect his BJJ to come in handy here, and he should be able to either wear on Aslani, eventually get him to the ground, or change levels at a perfect opportunity when Aslani throws his reckless striking punches with big power. It's possible that Aslani can catch Dia early with something, but I think Dia eventually gets this fight to the ground and works to a submission opportunity for himself. The under 1.5 at plus money, worth a little bit of a shot considering how chaotic Aslani can be at times and the openings that would leave for opponents to get the better of him. So I'm going to go Dia. I don't mind the chalk on him, but I do think he ends up cashing in under 1.5 rounds here for us. Next one I'm intrigued about because we got Ian Postlethwaite coming in at plus 125, going up against a fellow Indian brother, Pav Sahota, coming in at minus 145. Keeping bias out of this, I do think Sahota is the better fighter here. He may struggle with Postlethwaite's grapple heavy approach if that's what he tries to implement here, but normally both of these guys are the guys dealing with fighters looking to take them to the ground. Postlethwaite has pulled off a couple of submissions from weird scenarios, and he's managed to push his record back up to 500 at 6-6 while he's currently on a 3-fight winning streak. But I do think he's going to be shit out of luck on the feet, where Sahota has really been improving his strength and conditioning, getting stronger, improving his takedown defense, and staying safe on the mat. I think he'll be able to keep this fight upright and pick apart away from distance and win this fight on the scorecards. I don't mind that minus 145 either. All right, next up we got Ronald Siahaan coming in at minus 150, going up against Igor Wojtas. This is another Ronald Siahaan fighter who's a part of that MMA Fight Academy system, and he was actually given an opportunity on road to UFC last year, but unfortunately they set him up against the guy that won the entire thing in Ray Saruria. We know exactly how that fight ended up going. Siahaan picked up a win in his next matchup against a very undersized fighter who was able to beat up on the feet, stuff the takedowns, do some good work from on top. But I think he's fighting he's definitely fighting a way more experienced fighter here in Igor Wojtas, who is coming into his 20th professional fight, but is a very solid grinder in his own right. When he really puts his mind to it and wants to take his opponents to the ground, he does a great job in terms of grinding them out from that top position. He actually has a win over Ian Postlethwaite a couple of years back. He's fought some high-level competition on the regional scene, going into the fourth round with current, I think, flyweight or bantamweight champion Shaj Haq for Cage Warriors, showcasing that he has decent enough durability. Siahaan will have the striking advantage here, but I think he's going to struggle with the wrestling pressure that Wojtas will likely put on him here. He's no Kamaru Usman with his wrestling, don't get me wrong, but I do think he has the advantages in this fight where Ronald has shown issues in the past. And again, Ronald is getting used to still fighting the international level of fighter rather than the scrubs that he was fighting over there in Indonesia. So I'm actually going to take Wojtas as the dog here, and I think he grinds this out and wins it on the scorecards. The over 2.5 is not a bad look either. Michael Blair coming in minus 300, fighting in front of his hometown crowd, going up against Deck Dean, who comes in at plus 250. First off, hats off to Deck Dean for continuously taking killer after killer that Cage Warriors continues to throw at him, and he's trying to pull off the upset. I just don't think that it's going to happen for him here as he goes up against a superior striker. And I think that we'll see Blair showcase his speed and striking advantage. Of course, Dean is privy to potentially getting a Hail Mary knockout, but I do think that Blair will showcase superior footwork, combination striking, and then eventually finding that big shot to put Dean down and out. I think Dean knocks him out in under 1.5 rounds. Moving on to the next fight, we got Jamie MacDonald coming in at minus 200, going up against Nel Ariano, who comes in at plus 170. If this was a battle of physiques, obviously Ariano would likely get his hand raised, but MacDonald seems to show a little bit more process to his madness, whereas Ariano is a little bit slow on the feet, doesn't throw with a whole lot of power. When he's in that top position, not bad from with his takedowns and some of his throws he's been able to show, but off of his back, he can be held down and he can be grinded out. Minus 200 is not a number I want to get behind with MacDonald, considering he's still green in his career. Didn't have the greatest amateur run either. And maybe the physicality of Ariano comes into play here, where he ends up stopping some of the takedowns or surviving early and starts pulling away in deeper waters. But I am going to lean MacDonald here. I do think that his grapple-heavy approach will be superior to Ariano's, and I do think that allows him to go out there and either get a later finish or end up winning this fight on the scorecards. Next up, we got Jordan Strong coming in at minus 145, going up against Jordan Little, coming in at plus 125. Now, Strong was closer to minus 180 when I originally studied this fight earlier today, and action has come in on Little, bringing that line down to minus 145. Little has more amateur experience than Strong coming into his pro career, I believe with a 14-11 amateur record, but Strong has been undefeated through his amateur and pro run thus far. I just wish we would see him a little bit more active, as this will be his first fight, I believe, in 2 years. He can be taken down, but he showcases some good work on the ground, and he's done some good work in terms of establishing top position and hurting his opponents from that top position as well. I think he's the better technical fighter here, but going up against the experience of Little, it gives me a little bit of pause in terms of having too much confidence on the Strong side. I'm still going to pick Strong to win this matchup, as I do think that he'll be able to establish better dominant positions and keep Little on his back, and I do think that could have potentially opened up a submission opportunity for him probably in the second or third round. So give me Jordan Strong by sub. Next up, one of my favorite Cage Warriors prospects takes center stage here. Jack Eglin coming in at minus 210, going up against Dan Duijs coming in at plus 180. Eglin splits his camp between England and the MMA lab down there in Arizona. He's actually the dating Benson Henderson's sister-in-law, who is also deeply involved in the BJJ world. But Jack Eglin is a guy who has 2 losses on his professional record, but coming against solid guys like Luke Riley and Sam Kelly. But Eglin, solid striker, very strong from that top position as well with his grappling. He's hella improved his his defensive grappling, allowing him to stay calm when he's put in bad positions, just as he was in his last matchup, and then eventually taking over where he's able to stop takedowns in the second and third rounds and really start pouring it on his opponents with his striking. Duijs normally looks to grapple almost immediately, never really giving his opponents an opportunity to try to strike with him. But I do think he's going to be up against it here, trying to take Eglin to the ground. He might be successful early, but I don't think it's going to lead to a finish, and that will allow Eglin to start pulling away in this matchup and looking for the finish in the second or third round. I think Eglin is very much improved from the fighter that we've seen from him last time around, and I think we'll see him continue to improve, especially with the extensive amateur scene that he had before turning pro as well. So I think Duijs is kind of screwed on the feet, and I think we see Eglin eventually finish him in the second or third round. Next up, we got Paul McBain coming in at plus 115, going up against Albert Diaz, who comes in at minus 135. Both guys primarily strikers. McBain coming off of a 2-year-long layoff. Last time around, he got finished by an undefeated Federico Pasquale. Showcases some decent striking technique, but I think that Albert Diaz's recent activity level and also his ability to kind of walk through that fire and still have success of his own will be the ultimate deciding factor in this matchup. Not a whole ton of confidence. I do think this will be a back and forth striking matchup, so minus 135, kind of not the number that I was looking at for Diaz, but I do think that we'll see him a little bit more active, a little bit more consistent with his output, maybe mixing in a little bit of his grappling as well to try to keep McBain on his feet. But this is a tough matchup for McBain to return to after such a lengthy layoff. So give me Diaz and Diaz by decision. The over 2.5, not a bad way to tackle this matchup either. Next up, we got Jan Quaehaegens coming in at minus 160, taking on Konstantinos Ntelis coming in at plus 140. Striker versus grappler matchup here. Quaehaegens, a very solid striker. He did get knocked out in his last fight by Paul Hughes, who is currently the hottest free agent on the MMA market, so I'll give him a pass for that. But he's clearly showing improvements in his takedown defense and his ability to stay safe even when put in bad positions on the mat, eventually working back to his feet and then getting off on his strikes again. He'll have a solid striking advantage here over Konstantinos. Konstantinos, young, still improving. I'm not fully sold on his wrestling. He could show improvements in this matchup to actually have success, but I think that Quaehaegens has showcased good enough footwork, combination striking that should keep Ntelis at range and at bay, and I do think that we'll see Quaehaegens really touch him up on the feet here and possibly finish him in the latter half of this matchup. Next up, hometown hero Kerr Harvie comes in at minus 225, going up against Kike Modesto coming in at plus 190. Harvie is a guy that went 0-2 during a stretch between, I think it was 2021 to 2022. I could be off on those dates, but he did manage to bounce back with a win last time around with a 55-second head kick knockout over a 5-23 opponent. It was obvious that matchup was set up for him to go out there and get back into the win column, something that he had not seen for at least 2 years up until that point. He is a guy that normally relies on grapple-heavy approaches to take opponents to the ground and grind them out. In the striking realm, he leaves a lot to be desired in terms of continuously getting dinged on the feet. Doesn't really showcase damage all that well either. His durability not that bad, but he gets caught up pretty easily and can be touched up by superior strikers. It's really his ground game that sets him apart from most of his opponents, but he hasn't been able to defeat a legitimate enough opponent for me to give him the flowers that he deserves, especially at minus 225. His opponent this week in Modesto is coming off of a loss back in October, but he shows that he's a very difficult fighter to put away. In all of his losses, he has lost by decision, and even though some of his issues come when he is being taken to the ground, he showcases an active guard and ability to work back to his feet and continuously providing resistance to his opponents as they try to establish any sort of dominant position. In the striking realm, he likes to move forward through a lot of vicious and aggressive striking techniques, and like I said, he's very aggressive off of his back. I'm kind of surprised the line is as wide as it is, as most people would assume that this seems to be a tee-up spot for Harvie to win in front of his home crowd. But I do like the damage advantage that I think we'll see Modesto have here, which will likely touch up Harvie when this fight is in the striking realm or when he's defending takedowns up against the fence, maybe landing some elbows while he's defending the takedown, throwing up submissions off of his back. I just think his priority of landing damage over the control of Harvie could make him more live than the plus 190 indicates in the spot. So I'm actually going to go with Modesto to pull off the dub here. Something else to note, between 2013 and 2018, he had a 5-1 professional record, and now he's 1-3 since returning to action in 2019 over his last 4 fights, but he's still only 29 years old. Hopefully, he's got his head on right here because this is a winnable matchup for him. He just has to not get finished and showcase that he can continue to be resistant if and when he does get taken down, getting back to his feet, throwing up submissions, whatever it may be. Just stay aggressive, land damage, and that should be enough for him to get his hand raised. Next up, Scott Malone coming in at plus 240, going up against Ntelis. Leblond coming in at minus 280. Malone on a tough 2-fight losing streak right now and is coming off of a 2-year-long layoff. Is a fighter that normally looks to take his opponents to the ground and grind them out. If he's unable to do so, his takedown attempts really start to go down the drain, and opponents are able to touch him up on the feet, just as we've seen his last 2 opponents do. His striking needs a lot to still improve, right? He has a decent jab, decent 1-2 down the pipe, but when his opponents have a legitimate striking advantage over him, they're able to dance circles around him and bust him up, and while stuffing the takedowns. His opponent Leblond, normally a grappler, but has heavily improved his striking acumen, just as he showed in his last matchup where he knocked out Michelangelo Lupoli in a devastating fashion, just crumpling him. But it showcased that he was trying to go for takedowns in that matchup, but when they weren't transpiring, he did a great job in terms of just mixing the martial arts and getting back to his striking, keeping the forward pressure and staying on his opponent, and then eventually that knockout showed itself to him. And I think that's what he can do here. Use his wrestling defensively and then outstrike Malone on the feet. Again, Malone getting up there in age now, 36 years old, 2-year-long layoff. Leblond closer to his prime, and I think he's the better overall fighter here, and I think we'll see him go out there, touch up Malone, and maybe even finish him in the latter half of this matchup. Next up, we got Aiden Steven going up against Gianluca Scottoli. Steven has been alternating wins and losses since 2019, compiling a 4-3 record. He is a guy that normally looks to go out there and take his opponents to the ground and get some control time. He does a great job in terms of taking his opponents back and controlling them from there. But I'm curious to see what this extended layoff will do for him, as it's 2.5 years since he's seen any action. His opponent, Scottoli, pulled off a big upset last time around where he was able to defeat Sam Kelly, who was my lock of the night play that night, and he showcased more than I've seen from him on the regional scene, but I also may have just overvalued or at least overestimated what I was getting in Sam Kelly. Scottoli pushed him up against the cage, grinding him out, and eventually beat him up and won that fight on the scorecards, even got a 30-26 on one of the judges' scorecards. But I think that Steven will showcase what I thought Sam Kelly was going to be able to do. I think we'll see him put Scottoli into some bad positions, control this fight for the majority of it, and grind this fight out over 15 minutes. But at minus 155, coming off such an extended layoff, and maybe me having a little bit of bias to Scottoli or against Scottoli, thinking that he's just not as good as I think he is, that will likely keep me off of this matchup. But I do think we see Steven control it and win this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, we got Sean Clancy Jr. coming in at minus 315, going up against Lucas Rodrigues, who comes in at plus 265. Now, Clancy Jr. is a pupil of Paul Craig, and it's obvious when you see him fighting as he goes out there, takes his opponents to the ground, and immediately looks to get the finish by submission or TKO. He's very strong from that top position, and I think he has solid entries for a guy that trains with Paul Craig, who has usually struggled to get his opponents to the ground with effective wrestling. But Clancy seems to have some potential and seems to have some skill, and I think he'll be able to showcase that here against Rodrigues, who seems to be going on some sort of regional European tour, as he just lost to Anthony Orozco last month for Cage Warriors. The month before that, he lost in a Polish promotion by submission, and he actually has a scheduled fight in a Polish promotion next month. So I think he's just trying to make the rounds there and trying to make a name for himself. Doesn't present many issues. He showcased some decent defense against Orozco, but Orozco was a guy that used more power than anything, whereas with Clancy, I think we'll see some finesse with the jiu-jitsu, and that should eventually open up a submission opportunity, which is why I'll likely take a shot on the under here, and I don't mind Clancy as a big favorite or a parlay piece in this spot. Co-main event, we got Rhys McEwan coming in at minus 280, looking to bounce back from his title fight loss to Liam Gittins. He's going up against Cameron Ellis, who comes in at plus 240 and looks to get back on the winning track after getting cut from the UFC 2 years ago now, where he lost to Arichi Lang and got finished. Now, McEwan, good dominant grappler. He normally takes opponents to the ground and just smashes them from the top position, has some decent striking, but he needs to really continue to gain experience if he hopes to get to the next level. Cameron Ellis is a first round or bust type of fighter. He really throws it all out there looking to get the finish. Otherwise, he goes out there and slows down and eventually gets finished himself. You saw Arichi Lang really targeting the body of Ellis, which is why Ellis started to slow down and eventually crumble from a body shot. And he has been training over there at Syndicate MMA the last year or so, getting in some mat time with Patchy Mix and Merab Dvalishvili. Has he been training with them the entire time? I don't think so. I think it's just because of being in Vegas, trying to do the damn thing over there. But I do think that Rhys McEwan should be able to survive the early onslaught that Ellis will be throwing at him, and then eventually take over and eventually find a finish deep into the first round or early second round. Another spot where we got to take the under 1.5 in the Cameron Ellis fight, because it usually comes through. But I do think McEwan ends up getting the finish here. All right, next matchup, probably the most difficult one to call on the card, in my opinion, between Chris Bungard, the veteran, who comes in at plus 145. He goes up against Dumitru Girlean, who comes in at minus 165. Bungard picked up a win over Perry Andre Goodwin last time around, but it seemed to me that Goodwin just really wasn't in the mind frame to fight. Every shot that he was getting hit with, he was getting hurt, and he was coming back from an extended layoff. Bungard is a veteran at this point in time, has a ton of fights under his belt, 35 years old. But I think that there's a clear level of fighter that he's going to come up short against, and the guys that he's going to end up beating. And I feel like he's going to end up coming up short against Girlean here, but it's hard to really bet Girlean at minus 165 against a guy who has way more experience than him fighting tougher competition. Girlean is the smoother fighter overall. Bungard may be the slicker BJJ player, but I think Girlean has shown that he has good enough BJJ defense that he should be able to stay out of any big trouble from Bungard. I know he got submitted by Leon Hill 2 fights ago, but I think Hill's size and lankiness provides a lot more problems for him than any of the jiu-jitsu that he'll be feeling from Bungard. I think Girlean will be able to pretty much control where this fight takes place, whether it's with his takedowns or the slicker striking approach, and I think he touches up Bungard over 15 minutes and wins this fight on the scorecards. But at minus 165, it's hard to convince me to take him against a veteran like Bungard, who's going to be a tough out for him and will give him legitimate resistance here. So give me Girlean by decision, but pass. All right. 16 fights broken down for you guys in quick picks form. Again, if you're looking for Octagon breakdowns, I'll have those on the Patreon page in written form, so check that out if you're interested in that. Otherwise, we are back to the UFC circus next week with UFC Vegas 91, I believe it is. Let me just quickly see here. Yeah, UFC Vegas 91, headlined by a flyweight matchup between Alex Perez and Matthias Nicolau. I'll see you guys on Monday. Peace.
Last thing.